And right now, the Senate continues its vote-a-rama on the final text of the reconciliation bill. At least 2 Senate Republicans remaining firm opposing this bill. Our Washington correspondent, Louise Martinez, joins us now live from Capitol Hill. So, Louise, very busy day on the Hill. You've been reporting throughout the day. The most important question for you right now is, do Republicans have the votes to pass this big, beautiful bill, and who might the holdouts be?
Well, as we know, Republicans in the Senate have 53 seats. We already know that 2 of them are firm no's. That's Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky. He opposes the big, beautiful bill on the grounds that it includes an increase to the debt ceiling to $5 trillion. And he said that he won't vote for the bill if that is included. And as of now, it is included. And then the other senator is Senator Thom Tillis from North Carolina, who is against the Medicaid cuts. Over the weekend, he had a social media spat with President Trump that ended up him saying that he's not running for re-election anymore, also obviously freeing him to oppose the bill more openly throughout today's vote-a-rama. Then there's 3 other holdouts to keep an eye on. That's Mike Lee, Rick Scott, and a third one that they want to see more Medicaid cuts. They've negotiated with Senate Majority Leader John Thune over the weekend. On Sunday, they managed to include a manager's amendment to increase Medicaid cuts some $300 billion. That would up the Medicaid cuts to over $1 trillion, Steve. So those are the senators to keep an eye on. So the short answer is we don't know yet. We can only see 3 senators vote from the Republican conference vote against this bill, and that would actually prompt Vice President J.D. Vance to make a trip from his place to the Capitol to be the tie-breaking vote.
And Louise, the official name of this bill, OBBBA, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, that's actually the name, One Big Beautiful Bill. So the fact that it is so big, like any bill in Washington, it's really hard to parse the details. So tell us, what does this bill ultimately accomplish? There seems to be a lot of criticism, but this bill does seem to contain many of President Trump's campaign promises.
Well, yeah, we need to remember that this is President Trump's big legislative agenda, probably the biggest that he'll have in the course of his 4-year term. In this bill, we have the extension of 2017 Trump-era tax cuts. We also have no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, an extension of the child tax credit, also more tax cut incentives for small businesses. And then we also have $1.2 trillion in spending cuts, and also about $150 billion for defense, $150 billion for border security. So just listing those are President Trump's main campaign promises. And included in the defense, $150 billion are going for defense, is also the initial payment for the Golden Dome that President Trump wants to build around the U.S. To protect it against hypersonic missiles worldwide. So again, there's a lot of criticism because obviously it's a very big bill that includes many things, but central to it is also the extension of these 2017 Trump-era tax cuts. So if this bill doesn't pass, we're going to go back to pre-2017 levels that would increase average Americans' tax burden. Back to you, Steve.
Now, Louise, even if this bill does make it through the Senate, senators, including the Senate parliamentarian, carved it up enough that it's going to need to be voted again when it heads back to the House before heading to the president's desk. House Republicans, the whole House of Representatives will have to vote on it. Are the Republicans in the House on board with the Senate's new version thus far?
Well, in the House, the magic number is also 3. That's as many members that the House Republican Conference can afford to lose if they want to see this bill pass later this week if it passes the Senate. And we already know that Congressman Thomas Massie is a firm no. We've also heard a lot from Congressman Don Bacon from Nebraska, who just announced he's not running for re-election. He's been opposing the bill on the grounds that he believes the Medicaid cuts are too far and deep. And without running for re-election, that frees him up to oppose without feeling the full fury of President President Donald Trump, as we've seen in previous cases. And on top of that, we have the House Freedom Caucus released a statement today saying that the current version of the Senate big beautiful bill is not up to par with what they're looking for. They want to increase Medicaid cuts or in general spending cuts. Let's remember that initially House Freedom Caucus members were promised up to $2.5 trillion in spending cuts, and now that has been reduced to $1.2 trillion in spending cuts. That's a substantial gap from what House Freedom Caucus members had negotiated with Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. So we'll see how that plays out throughout the week. It's also important to note the House Freedom Caucus members in the past have said that they're going to oppose the bill and end up supporting it. We saw that with the continuing resolution last year, and of course with the House passed version of the One Big Beautiful Bill that everyone except Congressman Andy Harris, the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, voted in favor of it.
NTD's Louise Martinez reporting live from the Capitol Hill. Great reporting. Thank you, Louise. And as the Senate holds a marathon vote continuing on that big, beautiful bill act, President Trump doubling down on keeping America safe by commemorating the opening of a Florida detention facility known as Alligator Alcatraz. Trump also securing a win from Canada amid ongoing trade tension. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
The White House is touting another major win by President Trump as Canada is now dropping a so-called digital services tax just days after President Trump told Canada that it's now halting all trade talks with the country because of the tax, which he called egregious. President Trump says the tax would hurt American tech companies like Google and Amazon, and the White House today told me that today the announcement will be a big victory for American tech companies, and it shows that President Trump knows how to negotiate. Watch.
Go ahead, Alice. Canada says it's now dropping its digital services tax on American tech companies days after President Trump says he's halting all trade talks with Canada. First, what's the president's reaction to this? Can you tell us more about his call with Prime Minister Carney over the weekend? How did he get Carney to drop it?
Prime Minister Carney in Canada caved to President Trump in the United States of America. And President Trump knows how to negotiate. And it was a mistake for Canada to vow to implement that tax that would have hurt our tech companies here in the United States.
And Kevin Hassett, director of the National Economic Council, told NTD today that the U.S. is resuming trade talks with Canada. And the White House is also pushing for the passage of the Big Beautiful Bill. And as part of the push, President Trump tomorrow will be visiting Florida to attend the opening ceremony for a new illegal immigrant detention center called Alligator Alcatraz. And that is the center expected to hold up to 5,000 beds. Here's Caroline Levitt talking about it today. Watch.
His trip to this detention facility actually underscores the need to pass the One Big Beautiful Bill because we need more detention facilities across the country. The last administration let in nearly 20 million illegal people from all over the world, and this administration is focused on arresting and detaining them.
And Border Czar Tom Homan today told me at the White House that Trump's trip tomorrow highlights the need for passing the Big Beautiful Bill as it underscores the need for resources on the ground, for example, like in Florida. What message it sends and how it relates to administration's push right now with the Big Beautiful Bill?
We're going to be out doing our job. We're going to be doing our job. We're going to arrest every public safety threat, national security threat we can find. And when we do that, we need a bed. Governor DeSantis is coming forth with a couple thousand beds. I applaud him for doing it.
And on Tuesday, President Trump will be joined by Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, as well as state and local leaders. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
The Trump administration formally notifying Harvard University that the school has failed to protect Jewish students, putting its federal funding at risk. The notice comes following a probe by the administration's task force to combat anti-Semitism. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more.
The federal government's multi-agency task force to combat anti-Semitism has informed Harvard University that it violated the civil rights of Jewish students. In a letter to Harvard President Alan Garber, the task force says, after a thorough investigation, HHS Office for Civil Rights finds that Harvard University is in violent violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin. The letter continues that the investigation found Harvard to be, quote, deliberately indifferent in some cases, and in others a, quote, willful participant in anti-Semitic harassment of Jewish students, faculty, and staff. Toward the end, the letter says Failure to institute adequate changes immediately will result in the loss of all federal financial resources and continue to affect Harvard's relationship with the federal government. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told NTD that the investigation found that the majority of Jewish students at Harvard reported negative bias or discrimination on campus.
While a quarter of Jewish students at Harvard felt physically unsafe, Jewish and Israeli students were assaulted and spit on. They hid their kippahs for fear of being harassed and concealed their Jewish identity from classmates.
In response to the letter, Harvard spokesperson Jason Newton says, in responding to the government's investigation, Harvard not only shared its comprehensive and retrospective anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias report, but also outlined the ways that it has strengthened policies, disciplined those who violate them, encouraged civil discourse, and promoted open, respectful dialogue. Harvard is far from indifferent on this issue and strongly disagrees with the government's findings. The task force to combat anti-Semitism was created in February in compliance with President Trump's executive order titled Additional Measures to Combat Anti-Semitism. The task force consists of the Department of Justice, the Department of Health, the Department of Education, and the General Services Administration. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
President Trump signed an executive order today removing sanctions on Syria. Meanwhile, the State Department sanctions members of the British punk rap band Bob Dylan for leading inflammatory chants against Israel. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
And this is in an effort to promote and support the country's path to stability and peace.
President Trump on Monday signs an executive order to remove sanctions on Syria to allow their economy to prosper. These sanctions, like asset freezes, trade and travel restrictions, were implemented over 20 years ago, and they targeted terrorists and human rights abusers. But since Syria had a regime change recently, the U.S. sees this as a new beginning for that country that has promise for a bright future. But the sanctions on the previous Assad regime and his cronies will remain under the executive order.
This is, again, an action that the president promised and shocked the world with in Saudi Arabia because he's committed to supporting a Syria that is stable, unified, and at peace with itself and its neighbors. The president met with Syria's new president when we were in the Middle East, as you know. And so
the U.S. has designated Syria as a state sponsor of terrorism since 1979. The executive order does not remove that designation, but U.S. officials say it is under review. There's also talk about the U.S. working to get Syria to sign on to the Abraham Accords, which would open up diplomatic relations with Israel, but there's no concrete plans announced yet. Meanwhile, the State Department disbanded its Middle East task force on Friday. It was recently formed to ensure the safety of Americans living in the Middle East amid heightened tensions. 16 flights departed Israel with over 650 U.S. citizens, permanent residents, and their accompanying family members. That's as some U.S. embassy staffers in Baghdad are also returning to work. They were ordered to evacuate on June 12th, just before Israel struck Iran. The State Department is also revoking visas of members of the British punk rap band Bob Dylan. The band members led chants that included death to Israel's military. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau called the chants a hateful tirade. He said, quote, "Foreigners who glorify violence and hatred are not welcome visitors to our country."
This was a very public event that violated, as you've seen from the Deputy Secretary's tweet, that very basic standard about the nature of who we want to let into the country. That's all right.
Bob Dylan was scheduled to tour in the U.S. in November, starting in Spokane, Washington. Obviously, their plans have changed. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
And we do have new details in a developing story. A suspect who allegedly ambushed and killed 2 firefighters in Idaho appears to have shot himself. Officials believe 20-year-old Wes Rowley started a fire on Sunday to only lure first responders to his trap.
Rowley was found to be in possession of a flint starter, and we believe that was his method for starting the fire. That eventually led to firefighters responding. At this time, we can't locate a criminal record for this individual.
Rowley is believed to be the only shooter in the ambush. He allegedly shot a total of 3 firefighters, one of whom was critically injured but is now in stable condition. The suspect was found dead at the scene. Authorities say local law enforcement have interacted with Rowley 5 times previously. They also shared one of his now deleted Instagram posts showing Rowley wearing camouflage dark makeup and a mask. Officials have yet been able to find any criminal history on him. As of now, the suspect's motives remain unknown. Kootenai County Sheriff mentioning Rowley at one time wanted to be a firefighter. Authorities are still investigating the case.